Okay, we're going to finish this up and look at one more set of factors about launching the young adult. Um, the individual characteristics here could contribute to a thing that's sometimes called complicated launching. Like the student I was talking about a while ago that had some physiological difficulties. If you send a kid off that has some psychological difficulties, they've dealt with depression a lot, or you're sending a kid off out of a family situation that's difficult. There could be lots of things that cause that launching of the young adult to not be typical or not be kind of normative. And so if that happens, we got a little bit of a different situation than if everything else is kind of normative. Last set of family figures here having to do with kind of, there we go, the notion of pseudo-mutuality. This is an idea that comes from Lyman Wynn and from Murray Bowen and other people from way back. But the level of pseudo-mutuality in the family, and pseudo-mutuality, I've got listed there the kind of 5 things that are kind of typical of what Bowen or Wynn would have called the pseudo-mutual family. And those are the tendency to preserve harmony and to deny differences, the tendency to confuse closeness with family fusion, the tendency to make acceptance in the family contingent upon acceptance of the family dogma, the fear that individuation will bring irreconcilable issues, the fear of the non-family world and all of its dangers. This is that family that has this tightness, this closeness, this cohesiveness that becomes dysfunctional, that keeps anybody from moving in and out of the family, that keeps kids from launching and keeps other people from coming in, like husbands and wives of your children. Doesn't welcome sons-in-laws or daughters-in-law. This is a kind of a sick family, but it's a family that, if you think about it, you can probably think about families that are like this, or families that are at least a little bit like this. It's very hard to launch out of a family like this because it's a family that it's a little bit of a kind of a borderline kind of a family, so that as long as you are absolutely loyal to us and stick with us and do everything that we agree with, then we love you like crazy and we treat you like you're gold. However, if you step outside of that, if you do something that we perceive as being disloyal or different, or choosing someone outside over us, then we will disown you and reject you. If we can't suck you back in, then we'll get rid of you. And this family makes it really, really hard on a kid to launch. It makes it really, really difficult to get out. And if you do, and then you go and you find a girlfriend or a boyfriend or something, it makes it really, really difficult to bring them back in to be a part of the family. So it's a real sad and kind of tough situation. And then there are issues that the individual deals with related to intimacy, and these are kind of related to that pseudo-mutual idea, a little bit different. But they have to do with our development of a sense of self, of being a person and not depending on someone else to give me that sense of self. This comes from lots of different people. I think I'm referencing here Jerome Kagan. There are 2 different options here, basically, and they will sound like that pseudo-mutual family. There's fusion, which is the notion that I get my sense of self from you, from someone else. If you develop a relationship with me, then I know who I am only because of how I'm related to you, which means that if you leave me, then I lose my sense of self. I don't have an independent identity, an independent self. It's built around whoever's close to me. And that may have been my family, and now it may be my girlfriend or boyfriend, or it may be my group of friends. So that if I lose another person, I lose self. We contrast that with the notion of really understanding how to develop intimacy, which is one of the tasks of a young adult. and that is that my relationships are not about me getting my sense of self, but they're really about me sharing my sense of self with someone else. To do that, I have to have it. I have to own it. It has to be there before I develop a relationship with you. If I come to you with nothing, then I try to get myself from you. If you've ever been in a relationship with a person who sucks all the life out of the relationship, maybe that's what's happening, because it's somebody who's trying to get their own identity, their sense of self, from the relationship rather than bringing it to the relationship. Lots of stress here, and navigating that stress seems to be related to how much self we bring to this stage as opposed to how much we expect to get from this stage. Okay? This is what Bowen called the pseudo-self, that person who gets their identity from others, not from within, but from other people. That's a difficult situation when that happens. We're going to start this, and then I'll probably come back and finish it later. Another thing that seems to happen in a young adulthood is that we tend to have changes in the way we basically think, changes in how we regulate our lives. Sometimes the way that we regulate our lives and deal with ourselves in the context of our world is kind of collectively thought of as executive functioning. It's how we manage ourselves. And I have some things here that I'm going to share with you that come from a big research project at MIT a few years ago that they called the Young Adult Project, where they looked at lots of young adults and things that happened to them as they moved through young adulthood. And so here are just a few of those, and we'll talk through them, and then we'll talk about them a little bit. First of all, more complex thinking. Our thinking is certainly more abstract in young adulthood. We learn how to do abstractions by the time we get to adolescence to a certain extent. But as we get into young adulthood, we're able to do more complex thinking than we are as teenagers. We begin to develop more appreciation for diversity. Teenagers are all about sameness. I want to be a part of a group of people that look like me and think like me and dress like me and talk like me. And I will move into a group and adopt all the characteristics of that group so that I belong. Well, young adulthood, we lose a little bit of that, and we begin to have a little bit more appreciation for people who are different than us, not the same as us. And that seems to be kind of a healthy thing for us. We also tend, as young adults, to look more for mutuality in relationships. Even if you, as a teenager, were prone to throw yourself at people who didn't care for you, or chase people who didn't give you the time of day, as young adults, we very often kind of grow out of that. We learn from that, hopefully, and we begin to look for relationships that are more mutual. In young adulthood, we're more likely to be attracted to someone who's also attracted to us. We're more likely to pursue someone who tends to respond to our pursuits. And so we look for mutuality in relationships quite a bit more in young adulthood. As Chickering said, we tend to regulate our emotions better, and we work toward that. We learn to do that. We value that. We want to look like somebody who's kind of together and mature, not somebody who's just ready to cry or scream at the drop of a hat. We also begin to change a little bit in our risk-taking and decision-making. Adolescents, of course, are much more impulsive, much more likely to take stupid risks. We move into young adulthood, we lose some of that. We begin to think more about decisions that we make. We begin to weigh more alternatives. We begin to collect consensus with other people more before we decide to do something. A 23-year-old is much less likely to do something stupid than a 15-year-old is. Part of that's frontal lobe development. A teenager's frontal lobe is not really working like it will when he's 25. So there's a shift. Now, there are a couple of caveats to this. One is that this change is gradual. It begins in our teenage years, and sometimes it keeps working on us for years and years and years. When you become 22 or when you become 18, this doesn't just automatically happen to you. It happens because of experiences and things that change over time, and it's gradual. The second caveat is there's no guarantee that it will happen at all. Some of us are 35 years old and we act like we're 12. You know people like that, I'm sure. I know some people like that. So there's no guarantee that this happens to us. Certain experiences like college and things like that will help it happen, but it doesn't always happen. Sometimes we refuse to change. Sometimes we have so many things built into us before we get to this place that we find it almost impossible to grow and change and become like adults. So there's no guarantee that it's going to happen to us at all.